Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. And joining me via Skype tonight is Sam Paton. Hopefully you can hear me tonight, Sam.
Hi, Gordon. How are you?
Hi, good to have you on the show tonight, Sam. Well, we're going to dive right into today's coronavirus figures. First of all, we have to get this over with every time now. As of 2 o'clock today in Scotland, there have been a total of 14,624 Scottish tests concluded. And of these, 13,061 tests were confirmed negative. 1,563 tests were positive. This marks an increase of 179 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infection has sadly risen now to 47. The latest UK figures available show 1,408 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. A total of 134,946 people have been tested, of which 112,805 were confirmed negative and 22,141 were confirmed positive. Now, the First Minister was briefing the press today and speaking at the daily COVID-19 press briefing. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, announced that the SEC would be transformed into a National Health Service staffed and operated hospital within 2 weeks, initially providing 200 beds to treat coronavirus patients. However, it would be, I think we have a slight typo. I think it's 300 beds. However, it would eventually have the capacity for over 1,000 beds. The First Minister also announced the suspension of some regular screening services so that staff can be deployed to work on the coronavirus testing. The First Minister's third announcement was that over 5,000 medical students and retired NHS staff have already expressed an interest in taking up jobs in the NHS. So, Sam, we're now entering into what we imagine is now going to be one of the most difficult phases of this virus outbreak, and that is this high point in the figures. So it's clear from what we're hearing from the First Minister today that they're expecting a rapid increase in numbers, or they wouldn't obviously be preparing a hospital with 300 beds to begin with.
Yeah, it's getting quite scary now and very real.
Yeah.
So we're kind of entering unknown territory now, somewhere that we've never been before, and it is certainly getting very real.
Well, the Scottish Exhibition and Conference Centre was a while ago was renamed the Scottish Events Campus, and it also includes not only the large shed building, but also the new Hydro Arena and the Armadillo Theatre as well. So they're talking about perhaps utilising all three of the buildings, possibly, if needed. So there's plenty of scope for expansion in there, and I think they've maybe chosen this site because it has that capability and it's central as well.
Yeah, you're right, Gordon. It's central. It's the capacity. But I just find it still surreal to even think about at the moment. I know it's happening and it's very real, but it's just an unknown territory, very surreal to think that we're kind of reaching this stage. We're kind of used to watching things like this from the comfort of our own home and seeing things happening abroad, disasters and pandemics, but now we're actually living it.
Yeah.
And it's getting quite scary now.
We can see on our screens now, Sam, a graph. I think these are the Scottish figures. Right up until, I think it's 2 o'clock today, these are the up-to-date Scottish figures, and you can see the steeply rising line there above everything else, as the number's still keeping up in a straight line just now, so there hasn't been a drop-off yet. The UK figures from this morning showing a similar steep climb. In fact, almost looks steeper, but then the graph might be different. But the UK, you can see also from the large green dot in England that there is a real hotspot, particularly in London. We don't have the Scottish figures. We have Scottish figures up until 9 this morning, but the figures we're looking at here for England are as of now, I think. No. Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm just being told that we have the up to date. Yeah, we have the up to date figures for Scotland. Anyway, the Scottish and English governments give their totals at different times, which is very confusing for people like me, Sam, sadly. But you can see that
it is a bit confusing to try and kind of keep up to date with all the kind of information and figures. Because I know myself, we were talking just before coming online when we were talking about the figures and things, and it is quite confusing when the UK government is talking about figures, because you're not sure if they're talking about the UK as a whole or the NHS England. So it is quite confusing. So what I'm trying to do is kind of try and listen more to the Scottish figures.
Yeah.
So we get a kind of more realistic for what's going on in Scotland. But even then, it's very confusing. Yeah. But the one thing that I have heard, I mean, I've not been out and about as a lot of people, but talking to the neighbours over the garden fence seems becoming normal now. And one thing that all the neighbours are saying is, and where everybody's in agreement with over the garden fence, is when Nicola Sturgeon's talking, she's very clear and concise, whereas if it's Boris or one of the other ones, people are not quite sure, they're a bit confused, the information's not as clear and concise.
Yeah.
So I think that's adding to the confusion with the information that's coming out through the bulletins with the UK government. They are not clear and concise. The language that's being used.
Well, Nicola's also been, she's been quite specific in saying that the new Scottish-run medical facility could be open within 2 weeks and has room to expand. To another 1,000 patients. So they're well. So I'm just going to look at the next part of this, and this is actually some more detail now on the temporary hospital, with initially 300 beds is to be created at the Scottish Events Campus, or the SEC, in Glasgow, to increase the patient capacity during the coronavirus epidemic. And the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said that the NHS medical facility will be open within 2 weeks and could expand to hold more than 1,000 patients later if required. Jill Young, the former Chief Executive of the Golden Jubilee Hospital at Clydebank, has been appointed the Chief Executive of the temporary hospital. The First Minister said, "Our NHS is on an emergency footing and all health boards have been undertaking extensive work across Scotland to maximise the capacity available to manage the expected rise in demand due to COVID-19. There are currently approximately 13,000 beds in NHS hospitals across Scotland, and health boards are working to ensure that we have capacity of at least 3,000 available for COVID-19 patients. They're also quadrupling intensive care unit capacity to 700. We expect this to provide sufficient treatment capacity to meet the rise in demand. As a safeguard and to provide extra flexibility, we have been working closely with the military to plan and build this facility, which initially will be for use by those who have been through hospital treatment and are recovering from their symptoms. I hope this facility will not be needed, as alongside the public's contributed efforts to stay at home and the steps we are already taking to increase the number of NHS beds, we should have the beds we need. I want to repeat my thanks to all of our NHS staff working to protect and treat those of us who need it, and to everyone staying at home and doing their bit to face these unprecedented challenges. It's essential that everyone continues to stay at home, except for key workers, essential shopping, reasonable exercise, or caring for the vulnerable, in order to avoid overwhelming our NHS staff and facilities." So, Sam, it sounds like it's been expected for some time. I think the government, the Scottish government, has been working to a clearly defined timetable here. This is evidence of planning, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. I agree with you, Gordon. I think there's been planning behind the scenes before the announcements have been made, and I think we'd be naive to believe otherwise. Yeah. The end of the day, they knew about COVID-19, and when it started spreading to various countries around the world, definitely they have obviously the Scottish Government has went into plan mode and started kind of thinking about the bigger picture. And yeah, we hope that some of these plans will never get played out and they never come to pass. But it seems I don't know if it's secure to. I don't know how to word it at the moment because, as I say before, we're in a surreal situation. It's. I'm going to use the word nice. I don't think the word nice is probably appropriate, but in the sense that they are pre-planning and they are forward-thinking, gives us a kind of sense of security. But as I say, I hope this pre-planning never comes into play and we don't need it. And yeah, it's scary days ahead. It is certainly scary days ahead, and obviously the military is going to be getting used to kind of help out and assist, which is normal in emergency situations for the military to be used. One of the ones that I remember is with the Green Goddesses when the fire brigade many years ago. So I think people need to kind of be careful, be sensible, common sense, and stay indoors and just don't panic. I think that's the big thing, because is people not getting into panic mode? Because I think if people start getting into panic mode, then it makes it a bit more difficult, and it makes everybody's job a bit more difficult. It makes the government's job a bit more difficult as well. If people start getting into panic mode, it's keeping everyone calm.
Well, I heard somebody recently posted on social media that they had been travelling to hospital in England for specialist treatment, and they travelled down from the Highlands through central Scotland to the Central Belt and on to the south, and they noticed a distinct difference in the way people were responding to the stay-at-home message. In Scotland, it was deserted. Everywhere was quiet. There was nobody on the streets. And as soon as they got into the north of England, it was a different story. There were people milling about everywhere. So it seems that the message is being taken differently in different places. But certainly here in Scotland, it seems extremely quiet. I mean, even driving into the studio this evening, I don't think I saw a single person on the street. Anyway, be that as it may, one of the unfortunate side effects of this virus is that something else in the health service inevitably has to give way or has to suffer because of this. And our next item is about that exact subject, really. And this is about health screening programmes in the NHS having to be paused. And due to the rapidly changing situation with coronavirus, the Scottish Government is to temporarily pause a number of screening programmes. In practice, this means that no additional patients will be invited for screening until further notice. Results for those who have recently been screened or who have completed and returned home test kits will continue to be processed. The move means that healthcare staff can be reallocated to support other essential services, including COVID-19 laboratory testing and covering for colleagues who are unwell or self-isolating. Because members of the public are already choosing not to attend appointments, a structured pause also helps to ensure people will not miss their screening altogether. The pause programmes are as follows: breast screening, that's mammograms, cervical screening or smear tests, bowel screening, these are the home test kits, and abdominal aortic aneurysm screening, ultrasound for the abdomen, and also diabetic retinopathy, that's eye screening, images taken of the eye. Also, pregnancy and newborn screening programmes, including tests offered during pregnancy and just after birth, will continue where logistically practical. The Public Health Minister, Joe Fitzpatrick, said, "This has been a difficult decision to take, but it's important to be aware that these screening programmes are focused on a well population who are not known to have the conditions they are screened for. I want members of the public to be assured that we will restart screening programmes just as soon as it is safe to do so following clinical advice. When this happens, invitations will be reissued and appointments will be rearranged. In the meantime, it's absolutely vital for patients in between screening appointments or awaiting a rescheduled appointment to be aware of any symptoms or signs of the conditions screened for. Anyone having these symptoms should contact their GP practice." The Chief Medical Officer, Catherine Calderwood, also added, "While there are risks to individuals through the delayed diagnosis of conditions picked up by screening programmes, These risks need to be weighed up against the context of the pressures of the NHS in Scotland posed by COVID-19 and balanced against other difficult decisions we will need to make. The programmes will be potentially fragile due to staff absences, and there are clear risks to patients in being asked to attend for screening. The redeployment of staff to work in other areas is also a valuable part of our national effort to tackle the effects of COVID-19. So, Sam, this is one of those unfortunate things which I guess has to be done eventually when you have a pandemic which is threatening to almost overwhelm our current health service, that some other things will have to be put on pause for the time being. I dare say that a number of women will be quite glad not to have to attend mammograms and smear tests. They're obviously uncomfortable tests, but they're essential as part of health screening.
Well, I'm one of the women that go every year for a mammogram.
Yeah.
I'm classified as a high category when it comes to breast cancer. So it's quite difficult.
Does it worry you,
however,
Sam,
I understand why this decision's been made, and I actually agree with them. Me being a bit late for one of a mammogram, which I receive yearly, may not make a difference to
Sam,
me.
they're saying that if your test is already being scheduled, it will go ahead.
Well, I get my mammogram appointment. I get it automatic every year. When I go for my mammogram, I'm given my
so you've got a standing appointment then.
Appointment.
You should be okay by the sound of this.
So I might be, but if I'm cancelled, then I wouldn't be surprised. I can completely understand why.
Yeah. I think
understand.
The minister was saying that this is aimed at well people, and I'm not quite sure how he intended that to be, but I think he's saying that people who exhibit symptoms of the diseases being screened for if they go to see their GPs. But it must be a worrying thing.
I'm quite lucky in my situation that I've got quite a good GP. If I notice any changes, any symptoms, my GP is on it right away.
Well, that's good.
So
as long as you're well, Sam, I think you'll be fine
when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So I'm quite lucky, and I'm more than aware of symptoms and any changes.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of these really difficult situations that we're in.
Yeah.
And this is unfortunately one of the difficult choices that's going to have to be made by the NHS.
Yeah, it's the lab staff that they're really wanting to make sure that they have enough laboratory staff to do COVID-19 tests. And so they've got the testing capacity, I guess. Well, anyway, listen, I'd like to move on, Sam, if I may, to your next story. And you know yourself, being cooped up at home, it's boring. You want to be out there doing something, and many of us feel a sense of helplessness during this emergency.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Well, apparently tens of thousands of people have already signed up to help during the coronavirus outbreak. More than 21,000 people have actually signed up to volunteer during the coronavirus pandemic through a new Scotland Cares campaign. The volunteers offered their support through Ready Scotland's website, which launched this morning. Over 8,000 people have offered their support to public services through the Red Cross, and over 11,000 more through working with existing charities and groups via Volunteer Scotland. In addition, nearly 2,000 people have used a recruitment portal, also accessible through Ready Scotland, to indicate that they have the relevant skills and qualifications to work in the NHS. This takes the total numbers of students and retired health and social care workers who've expressed their interest to nearly 6,000. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said, "I want to thank each and every person who has registered an interest in the Scotland Cares campaign. The offer of support at this critical time is invaluable. As well as enabling medical students and former health staff to help the NHS, it also encourages people to help their communities across Scotland." The response we've had to this call for applications is indicative, I think, of a wider point. Many people across Scotland are responding to this difficult period by showing a sense of community and solidarity. The Cabinet Minister for Social Security and Older People, Shirley Ann Somerville, said the response to the Scotland Cares campaign, which recorded over 21,000 new volunteers in just one day, has been tremendous. This is in addition to the thousands of students and retired health and social care workers who've expressed an interest in or applied for posts to help support the NHS during the coronavirus outbreak. Thank you to everyone who has already registered to volunteer or who have signed up to support our NHS. Your support at this critical time is invaluable. Volunteers who want to support their communities should visit www.readyscotland.org to find out how they can help. Now, this is something, Sam, that I wasn't aware of actually until early this morning, that the Scottish Government has actually organised a way for people to get involved in helping to fight the pandemic. I'm not sure if where you live there is quite the same arrangement, is there?
I'm the same as you, Gordon. I wasn't aware this anything had been organised by the Scottish Government, but I am aware of people within the community where I live organising volunteers themselves. The communities came together, and organising and just generally helping out, whether it's getting supplies or medication for people, or just generally being there for each other. And a lot of people have got involved locally amongst our communities to do that themselves. Because I think at the moment a lot of people are feeling quite helpless. And because they're not going to work, it's that feeling of wanting to do something and help out, which is great.
I must admit to myself, feeling a sense of helplessness sitting at home, wondering what you can do to be useful, in a situation like this. But until you get a government scheme of this kind, there isn't really any way to get formally involved. But now we have one, and it seems to be almost overwhelmed on its first day.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's because people are desperate to help. They are wanting to help out and be involved, and and it's great. But then again, that's the kind of it represents what people of Scotland are like. We just like to kind of club together and kind of help each other out, and it is fantastic. You're seeing it right across the board. And now it's been formalised, it will make it a lot safer for people as well. There'll be a set of guidelines which will help to keep people safe, which is what was needed, because as much as people were doing it themselves, there was no kind of guidelines, and there was always that probability that people could be putting themselves inadvertently in danger without realising it. So now it's been formally organised, it'll be a lot safer. Well,
talking of safety actually brings us to another story this evening. Now, this is something I have to admit, I hadn't considered this, but students during the pandemic obviously have to be cared for because many of them are living away from home. And student accommodation during the coronavirus outbreak is another subject which hasn't really been covered very much until now. And in commenting on the provision of student accommodation during the coronavirus outbreak, Further and Higher Education Minister Richard Lochhead said, "I've written to all university and college principals, copied to networks involving student accommodation providers, thanking them for all their efforts as we respond to COVID-19. I've made it very clear that advice from the Chief Medical Officer and Scottish Government is that students remaining at college and university accommodation should stay where they are and not attempt to travel to their family home, even if it is in another part of Scotland. Whether they are living in student halls or private rented accommodation, they should remain there and not travel unless for food, healthcare or essential work. I've also asked that in addition to this ongoing support for students remaining in accommodation, that the institutions look sympathetically on any need for students to extend their stay beyond existing arrangements. I've asked that this be extended to those who have returned to the family home and are having to ask to break agreements. and that institutions continue to be as helpful as possible to avoid disadvantaging those students. I have copied my letter to the networks involving student accommodation providers so that it reaches not only all universities and colleges, but also private sector providers who are playing such an important role in supporting students. The Scottish Greens education spokesman, Ross Greer, MSP, has called on the providers, including Hello Student and IQ Student Accommodation, to follow the example of Unite Students and others and release students who are impacted by the COVID-19 public health emergency from their tenancies. Ross Greer said, "It's great to see that providers like Unite Students have made a commitment that no students will be forced to pay for accommodation that they can't use because of a public health crisis. This is clearly the right course of action and one that is appreciated by those students affected." Unfortunately, other providers, including IQ Student Accommodation and Hello Student, have instead disgracefully refused to support students at this time of crisis. In response to inquiries from my colleague Mark Ruskell, MSP, on behalf of his constituents at St Andrews, Hello Student even ludicrously tried to claim that it does not provide university accommodation. Instead of trying to maximise their own profits, companies like Hello Student, who have access to the same government support as any other company, should recognise that they must do the right thing by students at a time of crisis. If they're not moved by the moral case, then perhaps they might consider that many of the same students they are treating abysmally today will be looking for accommodation next year. And if this behaviour carries on, they might just look elsewhere. So this is another one of those stories, Sam, isn't it, where there are always some people in the private sector who are out to make money even in the middle of a crisis. And clearly Ross Greer has found two of them here and is giving them both barrels, it seems.
Yeah, we've seen this over the last week. Private companies trying to maximise their profits during this outbreak, but the fact is, the problem is with student accommodation being privately run by private developers. To me, it's beggars belief in the sense that if anything goes wrong, we are going to have these problems. This is to the extreme.
There's also Sam,
as I say, with it being private developers, I'm not surprised that this is their attitude. And the other thing that concerns me is if we've got students who are isolated from their families, what support are they getting? What mental health support are they getting?
Yeah, of course, that is what the Scottish Government
what's in place from the universities and colleges, to make sure that they are getting mental health support. But these companies, they're just despicable. They're absolutely despicable.
There's clearly two problems here, Sam, isn't there? There's the students who are being told to stay in their accommodation, despite the fact that maybe their university is closed, rather than going home, and they're not to travel home. And yet there are other students who clearly have already gone home, who are being charged for accommodation that they're not using. So there are two problems here, it seems. And obviously the Scottish Government is putting out the health message very strongly to make sure that they don't travel unless they really have to. And yet somebody somewhere in a couple of companies is trying to make money from students that are actually not using accommodation.
There's got to be a way where the government can step in and hold these people to account, because it's like the students can't win no matter which way whether they've left already to go home or they've got to stay in the accommodation. The government's got to step in somewhere and hold these companies to account. Okay, what they're doing is maybe not legally wrong, but it's morally wrong with the current what's happening at the moment. And I just think it's disgusting. They're just despicable. They're absolutely despicable. But this is the problem when you hand over these kind of services to private developers. Yeah. They've got the monopoly in this. The students have got no choice but to go to these people for their accommodation. Really,
Sam, I'm going to move on from this story to our next item now. Actually, for a change, this isn't about the COVID virus. Just for once, we have a story that's not about the pandemic. And this is news that a new poll has just come out showing strong support for the SNP at next year's Holyrood elections. A new poll published today shows strengthened support for the SNP ahead of the Holyrood election next year, with more than half of Scotland backing the party in their constituency. The panel-based poll for the Sunday Times showed the SNP support at 51% in the Holyrood constituency vote, an 8% increase in support from November, almost double that of support for the second-place Tories, trailing at only 26%. It also shows support for the SNP up 10 points to 48% in the regional list votes. If these figures were replicated in a Scottish parliamentary election, it's forecast that it would see the SNP win an unprecedented 70 seats at Holyrood. The poll also shows very strong backing for First Minister and SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon's handling of the coronavirus, with a net score of plus 52. It also found support for independence at 49%, leaving the question too close to call. Isn't as always. The SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown MSP said this poll shows that support for the SNP is continuing to grow to historically high levels as people continue to put their trust in the party to deliver for and to protect Scotland. It also shows very strong public support for Nicola Sturgeon's leadership and handling of the coronavirus pandemic, as the Scottish Government does everything it can to help people and communities and businesses through the crisis. While taking nothing for granted, this strengthened support would translate into a record number of seats in Holyrood and sees opposition parties trailing far behind Scotland's party of government. So, Sam, on the face of it, this seems to be a tremendous boost for the SNP. And it's quite incredible, isn't it?
It certainly is. Yeah, it certainly is, Gordon. But again, going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the show, talking to neighbours over garden fences, what people are seeing at the moment from SNP and from Nicola Sturgeon is a strong leader. Someone who, whenever is talking to the public, is very clear, very concise, is showing, impeccable leadership skills. And then in comparison, you see Boris Johnson and the UK government, and they kind of bumble their way through the press conferences, and they're not very clear and concise. Nobody really knows what's happening. And the opinion poll is basically reflecting that at the moment. So, the Scottish Government at the moment has got to kind of keep working on that and keep working to those standards and show that they are more than capable, and basically they're more capable of running Scotland and not let the people down, especially if more and more people are showing faith and trust that didn't before. Yeah. I know with my neighbours, they are traditionally for the union. And what they've been saying the last few days is actually quite surprising. I never thought I would hear coming from them. And they are talking about I just see this a message there on the screen saying, what's the new pussycat?
Yeah, your cat has been upstaging you while you were talking there, Sam.
Yeah.
Never work with children or animals, Sam.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a cat lady. I've got a few cats. This is Rihanna. But no, the neighbours are very much seeing Nicola in a different light, and very much seeing the Scottish Government in a different light at this moment in time. Yeah.
Well, listen, on this happy note, and with your cat's approval in the background, I'm going to push on to our next story, which unfortunately is not a happy story. This one is actually about Britain and extending its Brexit talks over the virus outbreak. Now, the European Union expects Britain to seek an extension of its post-Brexit transition period beyond the end of the year, diplomats and officials said on Monday, as negotiations on trade have ground to a halt due to the coronavirus pandemic. Europe has gone into a deep lockdown in a bid to curb the spread of the disease, and with more than 330,000 infections reported on the continent and nearly 21,000 deaths. Boris Johnson and Health Minister Matt Hancock have both tested positive for the virus, and the Prime Minister's senior advisor, Dominic Cummings, one of the masterminds behind Britain's departure from the EU earlier this year, was self-isolating with symptoms. The coronavirus pandemic complicates the already very ambitious schedule, said David McAllister, a Conservative German MEP who chairs the European Parliament's Brexit group. The European Union has always been open to extending the transition period. The ball is now clearly in the British court. So far, the UK government has consistently rejected such an option. But under the current circumstances, London should carefully re-examine a prolongation. London and the EU have been seeking to agree a new trade pact by the end of the year to kick in from 2021, even though the bloc has long said that such a timeframe was extremely short to agree rules on everything from trade to security to fisheries. EU diplomats said today that they expected a request from London in May or June. Johnson has ruled out delaying the dates when Brexit would finally take effect, following Britain's 2016 vote to leave, and said that London was also ready to withdraw from its current cooperation accords at the year's end without a new deal. His spokesman today repeated the deadline for the transition ending on December the 31st, and this is enshrined in law. We have shared legal texts and they are subject of informal discussions between ourselves and the EU Commission. I would expect those sorts of conversations to be carrying on this week, he told reporters. The structure of the negotiations has changed to reflect the current situation with regard to coronavirus. So there are more continuous discussions taking place rather than set rounds which were originally envisaged. Sources on both sides of the English Channel said that tackling the pandemic was sapping political energy and the government's resources to the detriment of the Brexit negotiations. It is reported that many UK civil servants previously focusing on Brexit talks had been shifted to teams dealing with the outbreak. In Brussels, diplomats and officials said that there had been no formal negotiations since the sides exchanged their drafts of the new trade agreement in mid-March, although some contacts between officials were taking place to exchange views on the documents. It's increasingly obvious the transition period will have to be extended, said an EU diplomat. It's a matter of political momentum. When things get so bad in Britain that Johnson can do a U-turn and say he's prioritising saving lives and hence delays Brexit. Both sides would have to agree by the end of June on the extra time of 1 or 2 years, and the Westminster Parliament has passed laws ruling that out. So here we are at the end of quite a lengthy story, Sam, but basically we're back to square one, where Brexit is still going to happen at the end of this year with no sign from Boris Johnson that he has in any way changed his position on extending the transition period. What do you make of this?
Are we surprised? I'm going to use the word, he's a bit of a prat, really. I'm not surprised. He is determined to go through with Brexit, regardless of the cost and the price. Anybody with a bit of common sense and a bit of savvy about them at this moment in time would be looking to kind of just postpone everything at the moment and just deal with the coronavirus. But no, it doesn't surprise me if he's just, my opinion of Boris Johnson's away kind of down there somewhere.
Does it not seem strange?
He just doesn't seem to get the fact that, right now, coronavirus takes precedence at the moment over Brexit.
Well, saving lives, obviously, to you and I, and most people in Scotland, I would imagine saving lives is more important than Brexit. But on the other hand, when the pandemic eventually runs its course, and we finally Brexit at the end of the year, we're going to be in a pretty poor state. Businesses are going to be on the floor, basically, with very little, if any, income and having to try and rebuild at a time when we have no trade agreement with Europe and no way of working out how to trade with Europe either. It sounds like the most ridiculous thing in the world to do, the most reckless thing to be doing at this time.
It's totally bizarre, isn't it, Gordon? He just seems to, he's just got this one-track mind of Brexit, and that's it. And you're right. Right now, with coronavirus, we could be doing with the help from Europe. We could be, especially when this is over and done with, to rebuild the economy, to rebuild businesses.
Yeah.
You've now got a situation where there is, goodness knows how many, I don't know what the numbers are, have been made unemployed in such a short space of time.
It will be millions, yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, Sam, that struck me is that there is a seam. There is, all the way through this pandemic, there's been this seam of sort of low-level xenophobia. And we heard, I think just yesterday, that Mr. Johnson had refused to take part in a European scheme to buy thousands of ventilators at knockdown prices by clubbing together and using their massive buying power to solve the problem of the ventilator shortage. And Britain refused to take part in this, and we're told by Michael Gove, apparently, that this was because we're British and we want to do it ourselves.
Yeah, it's just sheer
We've been left with no ventilators just because of this.
Yeah, it's sheer stupidity and sheer arrogance. It's like biting your nose off to spite your face, really, isn't it? They just seem to be, hell bent and getting through Brexit regardless of the cost.
Yeah.
They might be fine. They might be okay, but it's going to be the people on the ground that are going to suffer.
Of course, yeah.
Small businesses, even bigger businesses are suffering, and how that's going to. The moment, probably the kind of going through the coronavirus is scary. It's what's there at the afterwards, when we get to the other end of it, and our economy is nearly but crashed, and our there's no trade deals. There's how do people survive?
It just struck
the
me,
kind of big picture.
I don't know about you, Sam. It just struck me as incredible that the Prime Minister of a country which is in the middle of a lockdown, in the middle of a global pandemic, would indulge in such sort of petulant anti-European point scoring, because that's really all it seemed to be, at least to me anyway. I'm mystified.
Again, it's that same mentality that we seen during the referendum. It was just. It's just that nastiness, that nasty mentality, right wing as well, and they seem to be carrying that on, and it's detrimental. It's detrimental to the UK as a whole, and it's like cutting the nose off to spite the face. They don't care what the sacrifice, who's suffering, as long as they get their end goal. Which is dangerous.
Thanks for that, Sam. I'm going to move us along now to our next story. Now, we were talking earlier on, just a moment ago, about redundancies and companies going to the wall, and that is no more true than in the aviation industry at the moment. EasyJet today has decided to ground its fleet as the pandemic has pushed airlines to the brink. Today, EasyJet has grounded its fleet of 344 planes and has no clear idea when it might resume flights, the company said on Monday. In another sign of strain on the airlines battling to survive the coronavirus pandemic, the company said it would lay off its 4,000 UK-based cabin crew for 2 months, meaning they won't work from April the 1st, but will get 80% of their average pay under the state job retention scheme. The global health crisis has brought European air travel to a standstill. The Scottish airline Loganair said on Monday that it would seek state aid, while Richard Branson's Virgin Atlantic has asked for emergency help. EasyJet was also under pressure from its founder, Stelios Hadjilonou, who asked in a letter on Sunday for it to cancel or renegotiate a £4.5 billion order for 107 Airbus planes, because the extra aircraft would destroy the shareholder value. Hadjilonou, who along with his family owns about a third of EasyJet's shares, has been a long-time critic of the airline's plans, saying it was putting expansion before profit growth. EasyJet said it was trying to reduce payments, including those on aircraft, and would respond to the letter privately. It said many times that its arrangement with Airbus gives it a great deal of flexibility. Airbus itself played down any possibility of cancelling the EasyJet contract. Any order that appears on our table is audited and is firm, an Airbus spokesman has said. Industry sources, however, said that there were likely to be talks with EasyJet and other airlines about delaying deliveries. Some UK airlines had been hoping for a specific state aid package, but the government said last week that it would only consider stepping in on an individual basis once carriers had exhausted all options, such as raising capital from existing investors. Virgin Atlantic has asked the UK government for emergency financial help, but it was not clear whether this would be in the shape of commercial loans or guarantees, or the government taking a stake. Virgin is 51% owned by billionaire Richard Branson's Virgin Group and 49% by US airline Delta. EasyJet said that it had no plans to ask for any bespoke state support and was focused on using government measures already announced. British Airways owners said that in a statement it had extended a revolving credit facility and was looking at measures to improve its cash flow and liquidity. Now, Sam, from all of the things I'm seeing here, the airlines are all taking very different approaches to this, it seems, with the headline here being that EasyJet has basically mothballed its entire fleet and laid off its staff for 2 months on 80% pay, with people like Richard Branson with the begging bowl out, and Loganair, which is obviously dealing with taking up from Flybe's disastrous collapse the slack. So all of these airlines are in trouble, but they're all taking different approaches.
Yeah, they are all taking different approaches, which is interesting. EasyJet, I would say, is laying off their staff for 2 months and paying them 80% wages.
Yeah.
They seem to be following the kind of same protocol as a lot of businesses in the country at the moment. There's so many businesses that are doing that. And it's a way of, even though the staff are still getting paid, it's a way of kind of bringing the costs down, but keeping the business afloat. Richard Branson with the begging bowl, really, honestly, we're meant to believe, this man.
He's been heavily criticised for asking for state aid of, I think it was £7.5 billion he wanted at one point.
Yeah, it's just beggars belief, and I know there's a lot of businesses out there that are really struggling, and all businesses of all shapes and sizes right now are really struggling, and a lot of them were struggling before the coronavirus because they were struggling because of Brexit. Yeah,
so we've got a double whammy now. We've got Brexit and a pandemic.
The perfect storm. Right now is the perfect storm, and so yes, it's okay the government turned around and putting all the kind of packages in place at the moment for businesses, but a lot of it's loans.
Yeah, well, of course, the first thing to suffer, Sam, isn't it, that when people suddenly lose their jobs, the first thing that gets cancelled is the holiday. Because it's an expense nobody can afford when they've lost their jobs. And
there's so many now cancelling their holidays, and there's people cancelling their holidays at the moment for months down the line, and they're willing to take the hit of losing their deposits or however much they've paid, because they're not willing to take that risk. Yeah. And that's the thing. When you start closing down businesses and when you start slowing down the economy, which has happened, one through Brexit and two with Corona, people's spending power starts to go down as well, which has a knock-on effect on the luxury items.
Well, if you're on 80% of your salary, then 20% of your disposable salary goes with that, doesn't it?
That's money gone, which can be a lot of money. So I'm still of the belief that, in order to keep, I'm a great believer that if you kind of make sure the people, with the spending power are okay, that helps to filter through to the businesses. But I think a lot of these big businesses need to have a look at their profit margins and their shareholders as well.
Yeah.
If they're expecting the kind of workers to take a hit, the shareholders need to take a hit as well. I would hate to think that some of these businesses are still going to be handing out big bonuses and, and things like that, when so many of the workers are getting they're losing 20% of their wages. So it's a tough one. It really is.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see that, especially in the airlines, them all taking different approaches. And I think Richard Branson's one of those ones who's got a bit of a brass neck, really.
Yeah.
But that seems to be his mentality and his attitude to business.
Well, listen,
he has got a bit of brass neck.
Well, listen, we're going to move on to our next story. Now, in the middle of a crisis, there will always be criminals who try and take advantage of the fact that there isn't very much security, shall we say, in certain places, and no more so than in the next case. A Van Gogh painting has been stolen from a Dutch museum during the coronavirus shutdown. Thieves have stolen a painting by Vincent van Gogh overnight from the Singer Laren Museum in the Netherlands, its director said today. The gallery in the town of Laren, east of Amsterdam, is shut to the public during the coronavirus. The painting, I'll need to pronounce this carefully, Lentetuin, or Spring Garden, which depicts the garden of a rectory in Nuenen and dates to 1884, had been on loan from the Groninger Museum in the Netherlands. I'm shocked and absolutely livid that this has happened, Jan Rudolf Delorme, the director of the Singer-Laren Museum, said in a video statement posted on YouTube. This splendid and moving artwork by one of our great artists has been stolen, taken from the community, he said. The police said that thieves had forced the building's glass doors open at around 3:15 a.m. The stolen painting depicts a woman in a garden with sparse red-flowered bushes and the church building in the background. The Dutch museums have closed because of the coronavirus outbreak since March the 12th. Now, we were just talking before we came on air, Sam, about the fact that there didn't seem to be very many police around, and particularly in yours and my neighbourhoods today. During the lockdown, perhaps police are focusing on other areas such as shops and retailers that are obvious targets for thieves. But here's a hugely valuable painting stolen from a small museum during the lockdown. What do you think? Are we in for a spate of this kind of...
This is going to be one of the problems at the moment, isn't it, with everywhere lockdown, is a lot of businesses, especially museums, are going to become a high kind of target for break-ins and at the moment, and that's I would like to know. I mean, I know the police at the moment. I mean, in our area, where I stay, I don't think I've seen the police or anything like that for quite a few days, but I like to believe that they're certainly out and about, especially more up towards Balloch and Loch Lomond and things. But you wonder, it's kind of leaving a lot of businesses vulnerable.
We've just been hearing...
because normally where businesses would have people in them 7 days a week or 6 days a week.
We've just been hearing, Sam, that the police have issued, I think it was 25 fixed penalty notices for people who were out and about, who are refusing to stop and all this sort of thing. So that was over the weekend. Anyway, listen, Sam, we're going to move on. We're running a little bit low on time. So the next story concerns Germany this time. And Germany hopes to launch a smartphone app within weeks to help trace the coronavirus infections after a broad political consensus emerged that adopting an approach pioneered by Singapore can be effective without invading people's privacy. The Germans are deeply suspicious of digital surveillance, and the use of individual smartphone location data to track the spread of the pandemic would be illegal under national and EU Union privacy laws. But the fast-moving debate has yielded agreement across party lines that would be useful and acceptable to track close proximity Bluetooth handshakes between smartphones. Now, that would resemble Singapore's Trace Together app, which records recent history such as contacts on a device. So, Sam, this is a little bit of use of social media for another purpose. But basically using the power of the internet and the messaging systems of phones to. But it allows them to communicate with each other and record where they were and who they came into proximity with. What do you think? A good idea, perhaps? Is it something we should think of here?
Oh, I don't know. In a way, yes, when it comes to coronavirus, yeah, it's good that they're going to be kind of tracing things and that. But in another sense, in terms of data protection and people's privacy, we're entering new territory there. So in terms of people's privacy, yeah, I'm a bit.
But then again, because it's an application.
One of those ones,
I guess.
But yeah,
using the data from an application for another purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
I'm not
listen,
sure.
Sam,
I would need to look into it more to find out more about it, to how it would affect people's privacy and things like that. Because I think at the moment we are entering uncharted territory with a lot of very quickly. It's happening so quickly right now.
Well,
even with just in this country with social distancing and things like that, being stopped by the police or questioned by the police and things like that. So this is a kind of, we are, it's. I think we need to get our heads around a lot of things at the moment.
What I was going to say,
any kind
Sam,
of application on the mobile phones to take data, I think, we'd need to look into it more and kind of decide and how it's going to affect people's privacy.
This virus and this pandemic has created a lot of difficulties, and no more so actually than in the trying to source ventilators to keep people alive during the most critical phases of the disease. And we learned today that Mercedes Formula One team has helped to build a new breathing aid for COVID-19 patients. The breathing aid that was designed and built in less than a week to keep COVID-19 patients out of intensive care has been delivered to London hospitals for clinical trials. The device delivers a steady stream of oxygen and air to patients who are struggling to breathe and can be used on standard wards, unlike ventilation, which requires patients to have an invasive procedure and sedation in an intensive care unit. Such continuous positive airway pressure, or CPAP devices, which are being used extensively in hospitals in Italy and China, bridge the gap between an oxygen mask and full ventilation. UK hospitals have the apparatus, but it's in short supply. Engineers from UCL and doctors at University College London Hospital developed a device which is claimed to be an improvement on existing CPAP systems, with Mercedes Formula One in less than 100 hours from first meeting to the first production model. The device has been approved by the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. These devices will help save lives by ensuring that ventilators, a limited resource, are used only for the most severely ill, said Professor Mervyn Singer, a UCLH critical care consultant who worked on the design. While they'll be tested at UCLH first, we hope they will make a real difference to hospitals across the UK by reducing demand on intensive care staff and beds, as well as helping patients to recover without the need for more invasive ventilation. CPAP machines are used routinely in UK hospitals to support patients with breathing difficulties on wards or at home, but the equipment is in short supply. The devices use positive pressure to send a blend of air and oxygen into the mouth and the nose at a steady rate, thereby boosting the amount of oxygen that enters the lungs. The positive pressure means that when the patient breathes out, the structures of the lung that exchange oxygen, the alveoli, stay open, which aids the oxygenation and makes breathing less effortful. Tim Baker, an engineer on the UCL team, said, "Given the urgent need, we're thankful that we were able to reduce the process that could take years down to a matter of days. From being given the brief, we worked all hours of the day disassembling and analysing an off-patent device. Using computer simulations, we improved the device further to create a state-of-the-art version suited to mass production. Tim Cook, a professor of anaesthesia and intensive care medicine at the Royal United Hospital Bath, NHS Foundation Trust, said if a patient can stay on a CPAP machine, they can stay on a ward looked after by specialised nurses rather than ICU nurses. A ward can probably look after 10 of these patients with 2 nurses and 1 doctor. 10 patients in ICU may need 5 or 10 nurses and 3 to 4 doctors. The cost of manpower needed in ICU is much, much greater, and ICU is a lot more complex and hazardous. So in our final story there, Sam, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and certainly this disaster that's unfolding at the moment has concentrated the minds of these university doctors and the team at Mercedes Formula One, who seems to be a very odd combination, doesn't it, of people?
Yeah. But then again, when you think of how with Formula One and the speeds and the G-force and the kind of breathing, they would need to be able to, when the drivers are driving these cars at the great speeds that they go at and going round the corners, I would imagine, they have got the kind of know-how for these kind of things.
Yeah, and everything has to be developed at very, very high speeds, and the turnaround for new bits for these cars is very fast as well. You know, they have to produce.
You know, some of the technology that comes through, even with their own cars, is very much, comes from Formula One. Yeah. You know, being these steps ahead, which is great.
These are the top engineers in their field.
Hopefully, these trials are successful, because it will certainly help out a lot and ease the pressure on the NHS as well.
Well, listen, that's all we have time for this evening, Sam. We've completely run out of time, but thank you so much for being a guest on this evening's programme. Hope to see you back in the studio next time, fairly soon. Anyway, that's about it from Scotland at 7 this evening. It only remains for me to remind you that if you wish to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the on-screen instructions now. Go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland. That's it from me and the team at Scotland at 7. If you are, I'm just being reminded that if you are struggling at the moment to afford helping out Broadcasting Scotland, don't worry, we're open to small donations as well. So if you can afford a small donation, that's terrific. In the meantime, we remain free to view as ever, no adverts on this channel. But that's it, as I said, from us tonight at our studio here in Cowcaddens. I'll be back on Thursday. Kenny will be taking the show tomorrow and Wednesday. So I'll see you again on Thursday. From all of us here at Scotland at 7, a very good night to you. And the cat too.